Hello. I just turned on the BBC News tonight and saw a lot of graphs, um, seemingly about people having been brought to this country for family reunion purposes, and then sadly deported later as criminals. And then I stopped watching the BBC News because I didn't know whether to believe half of it, and did tune into Newsnight on BBC Two. And what met me there sort of was more palatable in some ways, but shocking in others. Poor Ms. White. I do, I mean, she looked like a rabbit, a startled rabbit, crossed by Marilyn Monroe, crossed by Kate Moss. And then the long shot showed that she had no tights on. I don't know who might have stolen her tights. I hope she can afford some. And the Green Party leader, not leader, I don't know, the Green Party representative, she did sort of denote that they can't afford advertising and so on. But do hope, I mean, really, there is a backdrop of worry about whether we are going to be able to continue. Um, Steve Earnshaw, when he came over from New Zealand, and in the discussions prior to him coming over from New Zealand, made out that the earthquakes there had made such a massive difference because it had sent everybody into um, madness, really, forms of madness and depression and so on. And he was claiming that they had to rebuild society from scratch, or were trying to do so in New Zealand, and that they had, however, um, not taken a particularly massive violent approach, but had been trying to listen to what women had to say as well as men. But he was sort of saying that, and watching the news tonight, I thought back to that because I thought, well, is this credible? Is Yvette Cooper a credible character? I saw her in Parliament, seemingly. I am hoping that in some ways she does look as beautiful as she did do about 30 years ago. It's hardly, in some ways, credible. She certainly seemed more um, articulate than many um, were seeming not to, or to threaten not to be, in the BBC Newsnight programme. Um, the Conservative man in the BBC Newsnight programme referred back to COVID. Now, that could have been the collapse of society here, and was, in fact, somewhat similar to what the earthquake scenario would have been in New Zealand, but of course it was across the world. But the reaction to all those numbers lost, um, according to him, was to invite people to come from abroad to try and for work to try and stimulate the economy. But if they were initially being paid less than British workers would have been, how were they going to sustain their stay here? Initially, it might have seemed quite a lot of money to be on 20,000 a year, or 15,000 a year or whatever they're on. I don't know how much they are being paid. But then the cost of living, when it came down to it, would have been difficult for them. And so, you know, the worry is that they might have turned to criminality. Was that a huge mistake? Could British people have been employed instead?